The gunshot tore through the dining room before anyone finished their sentence, and for a split second, no one understood that the ringing in their ears was real. Eleanor was still holding the carving knife, still mid-laugh, when her husband's body jerked backward and shattered the glass cabinet behind him. Plates fell in a brittle cascade, porcelain breaking like fragile bones, and the smell of roasted meat fused with the metallic scent of blood. Her son Daniel stared at the spreading stain on his father's shirt as if it were a trick of light, as if color alone could not mean what it meant. "Call an ambulance," Eleanor said, but her voice was too steady, almost clinical, and Daniel noticed that first. He did not move. He did not breathe. He simply watched the way his mother's eyes flicked to the hallway before settling back on the body, calculating something invisible. The front door was still locked. The windows were closed. There had been no second sound. Their daughter Mara began to scream, not a shriek of fear, but a long animal sound that seemed pulled from somewhere deep in her lungs. Eleanor crossed the room, stepped over the glass, and pressed her hands to her husband's wound, as if she were sealing a leak in a pipe. "Daniel," she repeated, and this time there was command in it. "Now." Daniel ran for his phone with fingers that felt detached from his hands, dialing emergency services while his mind replayed the moment in absurd slow motion. He heard himself giving the address, heard himself say that his father had been shot, and even as he spoke, he knew how impossible it sounded. They lived in a quiet suburb where the worst crime in a decade had been He did not mention that there had been no visible shooter. When the paramedics arrived, they moved with brisk efficiency, kneeling in the blood that spread across the tiled floor. One of them asked, "Where did the bullet come from?" And Daniel opened his mouth, but no answer formed. Eleanor shook her head once. "We were eating dinner," she said. He stood up. And then it happened. The police followed, questions stacking over questions, and Daniel watched his mother navigate them with a composure that felt unnatural. She described the evening in careful sequence, each detail precise but devoid of emotion. Mara clung to the staircase railing, mascara streaking down her cheeks, whispering, "It was an accident. It had to be an accident." No one corrected her. The officers searched the house. They found no broken windows, no forced entry, no shell casing on the floor. One of them examined the far wall and pointed to a small, clean hole near the ceiling, almost hidden behind a framed photograph. "It came from inside," he murmured, and the air in the room thickened. Daniel felt his throat close. Inside meant one of them. Inside meant the gun had not appeared from nowhere. His father owned a handgun, kept in a locked drawer in his study, a precaution he had insisted on after a string of burglaries years ago. Daniel pictured that drawer, the brass handle, the weight of the key on his father's keychain. He realized he had not seen the key tonight. They found the gun in the study, lying on the desk as if placed there deliberately. It had been fired once. Eleanor stared at it as though it were an object from another world. "He would never," she said softly. He was afraid of that thing. Daniel wanted to believe her, but he remembered the arguments, the closed doors, the low voices that turned sharp when they thought the children were asleep. He remembered his father's face at breakfast that morning, drawn and distant. He remembered the way his mother had said, "We'll talk tonight," with an edge that felt like a blade. The detective asked, "Was he depressed?" And Eleanor's eyes flashed. "No." The answer came too quickly. Daniel felt something shift in his chest, a quiet crack in the foundation of what he thought he knew. Mara whispered, "Mom, tell them about the letters." And Eleanor's hand tightened around her daughter's wrist. "There were no letters," Eleanor said, and her tone left no room for discussion. The body was taken away. The glass was swept into piles. The blood was scrubbed, though a faint shadow remained between the tiles. Daniel stood in the kitchen at 3 a.m, staring at that shadow, and wondered how a life could vanish so completely, while a stain refused to fade. The next day, the house felt rearranged even though nothing had moved. The silence had weight. Neighbors left casseroles at the door, their faces etched with rehearsed sympathy. Daniel watched his mother thank them with the same measured expression she had worn the night before. She did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She functioned. At the funeral, people spoke of his father's generosity, his discipline, his quiet humor. Daniel listened as if they were describing a stranger. He searched his mother's face during the eulogies, looking for a fracture in her composure, but she remained intact, hands folded, spine straight. When the coffin was lowered, Mara collapsed against Daniel, sobbing into his suit jacket. Eleanor placed a hand on both their backs, steadying them like an anchor. That night, Daniel went into his father's study. The desk had been cleared by the police, but the air still smelled faintly of gunpowder. He opened drawers, sifted through papers, searching for something that would explain the impossible geometry of the bullet's path. In the bottom drawer, beneath old bank statements, he found a sealed envelope addressed to his mother. It had been slit open. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 3 words, written in his father's careful handwriting. "I know everything." Daniel's pulse pounded in his ears. He read the words again, as if repetition would unlock their meaning. Know everything about what? About whom? He imagined confronting his mother, holding the letter in front of her, demanding answers. Instead, he folded it and slipped it into his pocket. The paper suddenly heavier than it should have been. Over the next week, the police returned twice. They reconstructed the scene, measured angles, calculated trajectories. Their conclusion was tentative, cautious. The gun had been fired from the study doorway. The bullet had traveled down the hallway, through the open dining room entrance, striking his father as he stood. The distance made an accident unlikely. Daniel replayed the layout in his mind. To fire from that angle, someone would have had to stand in the hallway, aim deliberately, and pull the trigger. The hallway that connected every bedroom in the house. He watched his mother move through that hallway now, carrying laundry, answering phone calls, discussing insurance with a calm efficiency that bordered on inhuman. He wanted to ask her where she had been standing when the shot rang out. He wanted to ask her why she had glanced toward the hallway before pressing her hands to his father's wound. Instead, he asked, "Did you open the letter he wrote?" Eleanor paused, a towel suspended in her hands. "What letter?" Daniel held her gaze. "The one in his desk." She folded the towel with deliberate care before answering. "I did not open any letter." He felt the lie settle between them, thin but unmistakable. It was already open. Her eyes softened, but not with grief. With calculation. Then perhaps he opened it himself. "That doesn't make sense," Daniel said, and heard the tremor in his own voice. "Why would he write something to you and then open it?" "Your father was under stress," she replied. "Men under stress do strange things." Mara entered the room at that moment, and whatever tension had begun to coil snapped back into place. Eleanor smiled at her daughter, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Have you eaten?" she asked, as if nothing in the world had shifted. Days blurred into weeks. The police investigation slowed. No arrests made. No official declaration beyond the word ongoing. Daniel returned to university, carrying the letter in the lining of his backpack like contraband. In lectures, he found himself staring at the backs of heads, wondering how many of the people around him were capable of murder. How many wore calm faces while harboring violence. At night, he called home. Mara answered most of the time. She said their mother was coping, that she had started sorting through his father's belongings. "She's throwing things away," Mara whispered once. "Papers, old files. She says it's clutter." Daniel felt a surge of anger. "Don't let her." "Why?" Mara asked, and the question hung there, innocent and devastating. He did not tell his sister about the letter. He did not tell her about the way he had begun to doubt every memory of their family dinners, every argument overheard through thin walls. He did not tell her that he sometimes imagined his father standing in the hallway, gun in hand, aiming at someone else when the trigger slipped. One evening, Mara called again, her voice tight. "There's a man here," she said. "He says he knew Dad." Daniel's stomach clenched. "Put him on." The man's voice was low, controlled. "Daniel, I presume. My name is Victor Hale. I worked with your father for several years. I wanted to offer my condolences in person." Daniel did not recognize the name. "You can leave them with my mother," he said. "I have," Victor replied. "But there are matters I believe you should be aware of. Your father and I were involved in a financial venture that may have created certain tensions." "Tensions with whom?" Daniel demanded. "With people who do not appreciate exposure," Victor said evenly. "Your father was considering going public with some information. That information would have cost powerful individuals a great deal." Daniel felt the room tilt. "Are you saying this wasn't an accident?" "I am saying," Victor answered, "that accidents are convenient." When Daniel relayed the conversation to his mother, her expression did not change. "Victor Hale is a liar," she said. "Your father cut ties with him months ago." "Because of what?" "Because of dishonesty," she replied, "and greed." Daniel studied her face, searching for a crack. "Did Dad threaten to expose someone?" Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line. "Your father enjoyed drama. It made him feel important." The dismissal felt rehearsed. Daniel realized he did not know whether his father had been a hero on the brink of exposing corruption or a man chasing significance. He did not know whether Victor was a concerned associate or a manipulator exploiting grief. That night, Daniel dreamed of the hallway again. In the dream, he stood at one end while his father stood at the other, gun raised. Between them, Eleanor waited, her face unreadable. When the shot rang out, Daniel could not see who had fallen. He returned home unannounced a week later. The house smelled of cleaning supplies and something else, Something faintly sweet and unfamiliar. Eleanor was in the study, shredding documents. The machine hummed, chewing paper into thin strips. She looked up, startled for the first time since the shooting. "I thought you had classes," she said. "I did," Daniel replied, stepping into the room. "What are you destroying?" "Old tax records," she answered, too quickly. He reached for the stack on the desk before she could stop him. The top page bore Victor Hale's name, followed by columns of numbers that meant nothing to Daniel but felt dangerous. Eleanor's hand clamped around his wrist. "You are not a child," she said quietly, and there was steel in her voice. "But you are not equipped to handle this." "Handle what?" he shot back. "Dad is dead." Someone pulled the trigger. Her grip tightened. "And you think digging through paper will resurrect him? I think it might explain why he was killed." She released him abruptly. "You are assuming he was killed." Daniel's chest burned. "The police said the angle made suicide unlikely." "The police say many things before they know the truth," she replied. "Your father was not the man you think he was." The statement landed like a second gunshot. Daniel stared at her. "What does that mean?" "It means," Eleanor said, her composure finally fracturing at the edges, "that he had secrets, that he made promises he could not keep, that he put this family at risk. By exposing someone," Daniel pressed. "By provoking them," she corrected. Silence settled between them, thick and suffocating. Daniel realized that in her version of events, his father was not a victim, but an instigator. He imagined arguments escalating behind closed doors, warnings ignored, threats dismissed as bluff. He imagined Eleanor standing in that hallway, weighing options that had no clean resolution. "Did you know he wrote you a note?" Daniel asked finally. Her eyes flickered. "What note?" He wrote, "I know everything." For the first time, Eleanor's face drained of color. She sat down heavily in the desk chair. "Where did you see that?" "In his drawer." She closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them, the calculation was gone, replaced by something raw. "He found out," she whispered. "Found out what?" "That I had met with Victor," she said, without telling him. Daniel felt his pulse hammer. "Why would you meet with him?" "To protect us," she answered, her voice trembling for the first time. "Victor was reckless. He wanted your father to sign documents that would tie him to illegal transfers. I went to warn him off. I told him to leave our family alone. And Dad thought," Daniel began. "He thought I was betraying him," she finished. "He thought I was conspiring." The pieces did not fit cleanly. They overlapped, jagged and incomplete. "So he wrote that note to you?" "Yes. And then he was shot." Eleanor's gaze met his, steady despite the moisture gathering at the edges. "You think I killed him?" The accusation hung in the air, impossible to retract. Daniel did not answer. He did not need to. The doubt in his silence was louder than any words. "I loved your father," she said, and there was a crack in her voice that sounded genuine. "But love does not erase fear. And your father was not afraid of anything." Daniel stepped back, the room suddenly too small. He imagined her in the hallway, gun in hand, confronting a man who refused to retreat from danger. He imagined a struggle, a trigger pulled in panic. He imagined something colder, more deliberate. "I was in the kitchen when it happened," Eleanor said quietly. "I heard the shot like you did, but the trajectory can be misread," she interrupted. "Evidence bends when people want it to." Daniel realized he no longer trusted his own memory. He had been seated at the table. He had not seen the hallway at the exact moment before the shot. He had assumed. Assumptions hardened into accusations with frightening ease. "Victor will not stop," Eleanor continued. "He will come again. He will suggest that your father was a whistleblower, that shadowy figures silenced him. It is a compelling story. It distracts from the truth." "And what is the truth?" Daniel demanded. "That your father gambled with forces he did not understand," she replied. "And someone decided he was expendable." "Who?" She shook her head. "If I knew that, do you think I would be shredding papers?" The answer did not satisfy him. It only widened the gap. He saw now that every version of events implicated someone different, and each version required trust he was no longer capable of giving. That night, Daniel sat in his childhood bedroom, the letter unfolded on his desk. "I know everything." The words felt less like accusation and more like confession. Know everything about his wife's meeting, about Victor's schemes, about his own involvement. The ambiguity was a weapon. His phone buzzed. A message from Victor. "We should speak privately. For your safety." Daniel stared at the screen, aware that every choice carried damage. If he met Victor, he betrayed his mother. If he refused, he might remain ignorant of a truth that could change everything. He typed a single word, "when," and hit send, before he could reconsider. Down the hall, He heard his mother moving, doors opening and closing softly. He imagined her pausing outside his room, listening. He imagined her deciding whether to knock, whether to confess more, whether to conceal. The house felt like a chessboard, every step calculated. Daniel lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling he had once decorated with glow-in-the-dark stars. He wondered when his family had become a network of secrets, when protection had turned into suspicion. He wondered whether the gunshot had been the beginning of the collapse or merely the moment it became visible. In the darkness, he replayed the sound again, the way it had split the evening in two, before and after, innocence and doubt. He understood now that the bullet had not only pierced his father's chest, it had carved a fracture through every relationship in the house. And as he waited for Victor's reply, he knew that whatever he uncovered next would not mend that fracture, but widen it beyond repair. Daniel lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling he had once decorated with glow-in-the-dark stars. He wondered when his family had become a network of secrets, when protection had turned into suspicion. He wondered whether the gunshot had been the beginning of the collapse or merely the moment it became visible. His phone vibrated again 20 minutes later, the screen lighting up the dark room in a pale glow that felt accusatory. Victor's reply was brief. Tomorrow. 8 p.m. Riverside parking lot. Come alone. Daniel read the message 3 times, the phrasing echoing in his mind with cinematic menace, and yet the mundanity of the location unsettled him more than any abandoned warehouse would have. Riverside was where families walked dogs and teenagers smoked in parked cars. It was not where conspiracies announced themselves. He typed back a single confirmation and set the phone face down on his chest. Immediately, he imagined his mother checking the phone bill, noticing an unfamiliar number, tracing it back to Victor. He pictured her standing outside his door again, weighing how much she could afford to lose. Trust had become currency, and he had begun spending it recklessly. The next morning, Eleanor behaved as though nothing in the house was fragile. She made coffee, read the newspaper, asked Daniel about his classes with a composure that bordered on rehearsed performance. Mara watched them both from the kitchen island, her fork hovering above her plate as if she sensed the tension but could not name it. Daniel caught his sister's eye and forced a smile that felt counterfeit. "Are you staying long?" Eleanor asked, folding the newspaper with deliberate care. "Just tonight," Daniel replied, aware that he had already committed to something that would extend beyond tonight. Eleanor nodded once. "Good. We should talk about your father's accounts before you go." "About what specifically?" Daniel asked, testing the edges. "About responsibilities," she said. He left more complications than assets. The phrase struck him. Left. As if his father had chosen departure. Daniel studied her face, searching for signs of guilt or grief, but found only controlled exhaustion. He wondered if that control was survival or strategy. All day, anticipation gnawed at him. He replayed possible conversations with Victor, rehearsing questions that would corner him, expose inconsistencies, reveal motive. Yet beneath the intellectual preparation lay a simpler fear. That Victor would confirm his worst suspicion, that someone in his family had pulled the trigger, and that every protective instinct he had toward his mother or sister would be weaponized against him. At 7:30, Daniel told Eleanor he was meeting a friend. She looked at him for a beat too long. "Drive carefully," she said, and the simplicity of the instruction felt loaded. He left before he could second-guess himself, the cool evening air sharp in his lungs. Riverside parking lot was half empty, lit by flickering lamps that cast long, distorted shadows. Victor's car was already there, a dark sedan with tinted windows. Daniel parked several spaces away, heart pounding with a mixture of dread and defiance. He approached the vehicle slowly, aware of how exposed he felt under the weak streetlights. Victor stepped out before Daniel reached the car. He was taller than Daniel expected, impeccably dressed despite the casual setting, his expression calm but alert. "Thank you for coming," he said, extending a hand that Daniel did not take. "Start talking," Daniel replied, keeping his distance. Victor studied him for a moment, as if assessing how much truth the young man could tolerate. "Your father and I were involved in offshore accounts tied to municipal contracts," he began. "Legal at first. Profitable. Then he discovered irregularities." "What kind of irregularities?" Daniel demanded. "Kickbacks, bribes, money funneled through shell companies connected to city officials," Victor said evenly. "Your father wanted to expose it. I advised caution, because you were involved. Because exposure would not only ruin careers, it would invite retaliation." Daniel felt anger surge. "So you threatened him?" Victor's jaw tightened. "I warned him." "Which is different how?" Victor stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You are assuming the danger came from me. It did not. There were others, Daniel. Men with more to lose. Daniel searched his face for cracks. My mother said you tried to get him to sign illegal transfers. Victor's expression flickered, annoyance replacing composure. Your mother met with me once. She begged me to convince him to stop digging. She was terrified. The statement rattled Daniel. Terrified of what? Of losing him, Victor replied. Or worse. Daniel thought of the note again. I know everything. Did my father think you and my mother were conspiring? Victor hesitated, and that hesitation felt significant. He was under pressure. Paranoia is a common byproduct. That's not an answer. Victor exhaled slowly. He believed that by meeting me without his knowledge, she had aligned herself against him. He confronted her about it. He accused her of betrayal. Daniel's chest tightened. Did they fight the night he died? I was not there, Victor said carefully, but tension had escalated. Daniel felt as though he were balancing on a narrow ledge. You think someone from these contracts killed him? I think, Victor replied, that your father underestimated how far people will go to protect power. And you, Daniel pressed, are completely innocent. Victor's eyes hardened. Innocent is a childish word. I am pragmatic. I did not pull the trigger. The certainty in his tone unsettled Daniel more than a denial would have. Then who did? Victor glanced toward the dark tree line beyond the lot. There were rumors of surveillance, of intimidation tactics. If someone wanted to send a message, killing him in his own home would be effective. Daniel felt nausea rise. There were no signs of forced entry. Then the door was open, Victor said simply. The implication landed heavy. Someone had been invited in, or someone already belonged there. Daniel's mind spiraled back to the hallway, to the angle of the bullet, to the absence of a stranger's footprint. You're leaving something out, Daniel said. Victor studied him again. There is a document your father prepared, a file containing evidence. He told me he would store copies in multiple places. If that file surfaces, the motive becomes clear. Where is it? Daniel asked. If I knew, I would not be meeting you in a parking lot, Victor replied. But, if your father trusted anyone with its location, it would not have been me. Daniel understood the direction of the implication. You're suggesting he told my mother. I am suggesting, Victor said carefully, that spouses often know more than children. Anger flared, protective and defensive. She loved him. Victor held his gaze. Love and fear are not opposites. The conversation felt like a chess match where every move exposed another vulnerability. Daniel realized he had come seeking clarity but had only accumulated more suspicion. Why are you telling me this? He asked. Because if that file exists, Victor said, others will look for it, and you are easier to approach than your mother. A chill ran down Daniel's spine. Are you threatening me? I am warning you, Victor replied. If someone believes you have access to evidence, you become leverage. Daniel imagined men watching the house, tracking calls, waiting for a mistake. He imagined Mara answering the door to a stranger with polite intentions. What do you want from me? Find the file, Victor said. If it exists, decide what to do with it before someone else does. Daniel stared at him. And why would I trust you? You shouldn't, Victor said without hesitation, but distrust everyone equally. The answer lingered as Daniel drove home, the streetlights streaking past in blurred lines. He replayed every word, weighing sincerity against manipulation. If his father had hidden evidence, where would it be? In the house. In a bank box. In someone else's custody. When he pulled into the driveway, he noticed the front porch light was off. Eleanor rarely forgot such details. The house felt darker than usual, windows reflecting his own anxious face back at him. He entered quietly, expecting to find his mother in the living room or kitchen, but the house was silent. Mara, he called softly. No response. He moved down the hallway, heart thudding, and found Mara in her room, headphones on, oblivious to his tension. Relief washed over him briefly. Where's Mom? He asked. She went out, Mara replied, pulling off the headphones. Said she needed air. Daniel checked the clock. It was nearly 10. Did she say where? Mara shook her head. Is everything okay? Daniel forced a neutral tone. Fine, just checking. He retreated to the study, closing the door behind him. If there was a file, it might not be obvious. He began opening drawers again, tapping on walls for hollow sounds, scanning bookshelves for hidden compartments. His father had not been sentimental, but he had been meticulous. Evidence would be organized, not buried randomly. An hour passed with nothing discovered. Daniel's frustration grew, mixing with a creeping paranoia that someone else might be searching simultaneously. He imagined Victor's warning manifesting in subtle ways. A car parked too long across the street, a stranger lingering near the mailbox. He returned to the dining room, staring at the faint stain between the tiles. If someone had entered that night, why had no one heard the door? Why had no alarm sounded? He walked to the front door and examined the lock. No damage. He checked the back entrance. Intact. His mind shifted to another possibility. The garage. His father often left it unlocked when working late. Daniel went outside, the cool air brushing his face, and opened the garage door manually. Inside, everything appeared undisturbed. Tools hung in neat rows. The car sat where it always had. He stepped further in and noticed a small security camera mounted near the ceiling, something his father had installed months ago after complaining about neighborhood theft. Daniel's pulse quickened. If the camera had been recording the night of the shooting, it might have captured something. He rushed back inside, booted up his father's old laptop, and searched for the camera software. It took several attempts to bypass passwords, but eventually he accessed archived footage. He scrolled back to the date of the shooting, heart pounding. The video loaded slowly. The timestamp showed the evening hours, the familiar garage bathed in dim light. For most of the recording, nothing happened. Then, at 7:42 p.m., the side door connecting the garage to the hallway opened. Daniel leaned closer to the screen. A figure stepped into view, partially obscured by shadow. The angle made identification difficult, but the height and build were unmistakably familiar. The person paused, glanced toward the driveway, then moved into the hallway and out of frame. Daniel's breath caught. The timestamp read 7:42. The gunshot had occurred at 7:45. His mind raced. If that figure had entered from the garage 3 minutes before the shot, then the shooter had been inside the house, not outside. He replayed the footage, adjusting brightness, straining to discern facial features. The shadow concealed too much. He scrubbed forward. At 7:47, the same door opened again. The figure reappeared, movements hurried now, head lowered. In one hand was something metallic. The person exited the garage through the main door and disappeared into the night. Daniel's hands trembled on the keyboard. He paused the frame and zoomed in on the figure's silhouette. The posture, the slight tilt of the head, the way the left shoulder dipped lower than the right. Recognition dawned with a slow, crushing weight. It resembled Eleanor. He stared at the frozen image, mind rejecting the conclusion even as his eyes confirmed it. The height matched. The shape of the hair matched. The way she walked, decisive but controlled, matched. But resemblance was not proof. Shadows distorted. Perspective deceived. Daniel replayed the clip again and again, searching for alternative interpretations. Perhaps it was his father. Perhaps it was someone wearing similar clothing. Perhaps the timestamp was wrong. Each possibility felt thinner than the last. Footsteps sounded in the hallway behind him. He slammed the laptop shut instinctively, heart hammering. The study door opened slowly, and Eleanor stepped inside, her expression unreadable. "What are you doing up?" she asked softly. Daniel swallowed. Looking through Dad's files. Her gaze flicked briefly to the closed laptop. "Find anything?" He hesitated, then forced steadiness into his voice. "Maybe." Eleanor stepped closer, the scent of cold night air clinging to her coat. "Daniel," she said, "if you are chasing ghosts, you will only create new ones." He met her eyes, searching for the woman who had raised him, who had bandaged, scraped knees, and attended school recitals. "Were you in the garage that night?" he asked. A flicker of something crossed her face, too quick to categorize. "Why would I be?" "There's footage," he said, unable to contain the tremor. "From the security camera." Silence expanded between them, dense and suffocating. "What does it show?" she asked finally. Daniel's throat felt dry. "Someone entering the hallway 3 minutes before the shot, and leaving 2 minutes after." Her expression did not collapse. It tightened. "And you assume that someone is me." "I don't know what to assume," he replied, his voice cracking despite his effort. "But it looks like you." Eleanor inhaled slowly, as if steadying herself. "Then perhaps you should watch it again." "I did," he said. "Without context," she replied. "Without understanding." "Then explain it," he demanded. Her eyes hardened, the vulnerability he had glimpsed earlier, replaced by resolve. "If I tell you something that implicates someone else you love, will you believe me?" The question hit him like a blow. "Who?" She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Your sister." Daniel's mind recoiled. "That's insane." "Is it?" Eleanor asked quietly. Mara knew about the arguments. She knew about the meeting with Victor. She overheard more than we realized. "She's 16, Daniel shot back. "And 16-year-olds are incapable of desperation," Eleanor countered. "Of anger." Daniel's thoughts splintered. He imagined Mara standing in the hallway, overhearing accusations of betrayal, fearing the collapse of the family. He imagined panic escalating into catastrophe. The image felt grotesque, yet possible in a way that frightened him. "You're deflecting," he said, but the certainty in his accusation had eroded. "I am protecting," Eleanor replied, "from assumptions that will destroy us." Daniel stared at her, torn between instinct and evidence, between loyalty and logic. The house seemed to shrink around them, walls closing in as if suffocated by secrets. He realized that every explanation demanded sacrifice. If he believed the footage implicated his mother, he dismantled the foundation of his life. If he believed it implicated his sister, he condemned her to a darkness she might never escape. "Show me the footage," Eleanor said calmly. Daniel hesitated, then reopened the laptop, navigating back to the clip. The grainy image flickered onto the screen. Eleanor watched without visible reaction as the shadowed figure stepped into the hallway. When the metallic glint appeared in the figure's hand upon exit, Daniel felt his pulse spike again. "Pause it," Eleanor instructed. He did. She leaned closer, pointing to the figure's wrist. "That bracelet," she said. Daniel squinted. In the pixelated blur, something did catch light near the wrist. "That is not mine," Eleanor said. "It is Mara's." Daniel felt his stomach drop. Mara often wore a thin silver bracelet, a gift from their father. He had not noticed it in the chaos of the footage. Now, focusing on the glint, he could almost convince himself he saw it. "It could be distortion," he said weakly. "It could be," Eleanor agreed. "Or it could be your sister walking into a hallway she should not have entered." The implication hung heavy, corrosive. "And you're just protecting her," Daniel said, unable to keep accusation from his tone. "I am protecting both of you," Eleanor replied, eyes unwavering. "From truths that will not bring him back." Daniel's chest felt tight, as though the room had lost oxygen. He realized he had crossed a line by revealing the footage, and there was no returning to ignorance. Evidence had entered the conversation, and with it, new fractures. "If Mara was in that hallway," he said slowly, "why would she have the gun?" Eleanor's gaze softened for a fraction of a second. "Because your father confronted her earlier that evening." Daniel's mind spun. "About what?" "About the meeting," Eleanor said. "He accused her of spying, of reporting his movements to me." "That's insane," Daniel whispered. "He was not thinking clearly," she replied. "He was afraid, and fear makes monsters of us." Daniel stared at the paused image of the shadowed figure, feeling the weight of possibility press down on him. The bullet had traveled from the hallway. Someone had stood there. The camera had captured a shape that could be his mother, or his sister, or neither. He realized that whatever truth lay buried in that house would not surface cleanly. It would tear through what remained of them. And as he looked from the frozen silhouette on the screen to his mother's composed face, he understood that the next decision he made would not simply uncover facts. It would determine which relationship he was willing to sacrifice in the process. He realized that whatever truth lay buried in that house would not surface cleanly. It would tear through what remained of them. And as he looked from the frozen silhouette on the screen to his mother's composed face, he understood that the next decision he made would not simply uncover facts. It would determine which relationship he was willing to sacrifice in the process. "Call her in here," Daniel said finally, his voice lower than he expected. Eleanor did not flinch. "And say what?" "Ask her where she was, at 7:42, he replied. "You think interrogation will protect her," Eleanor said quietly. "Or you," Daniel swallowed. "If she was in that hallway, we need to know why." Eleanor studied him for a long moment, then turned toward the door. "Mara," she called, her voice steady. "Come here, please." Daniel's pulse pounded so hard he could hear it in his ears. The hallway creaked softly as Mara approached. She stepped into the study, with confusion written across her face. Her hair pulled into a loose ponytail, eyes red from too many nights of broken sleep. "What's going on?" she asked, glancing between them. Daniel rotated the laptop so she could see the paused frame. "Do you remember going into the garage the night Dad died?" Mara frowned. "No. I was upstairs." "Think carefully," Daniel pressed. "About 10 minutes before the shot." Her gaze shifted to the screen. "What is that?" "Security footage," he replied. She stepped closer, leaning in. "That's not me." Eleanor remained silent, watching her daughter with an intensity that Daniel could not decipher. "Look at the bracelet," Eleanor said gently. "On the wrist." Mara's eyes narrowed. "I wasn't wearing it that night." Daniel felt his chest tighten. "How do you know?" "Because Dad told me to take it off earlier," she said quickly. "He said it distracted him at dinner." Daniel blinked. "That doesn't make sense." "He was annoyed," Mara snapped, defensiveness flaring. "He'd been annoyed all day." Daniel replayed the footage again, letting it run from 7:41 to 7:48. Mara watched in silence as the figure entered and exited. When the metallic glint appeared, she shook her head sharply. "That's too big to be my bracelet," she said. "Mine's thin." Eleanor stepped forward, pausing the frame and zooming in. The pixels fractured into abstraction, but the glint was undeniable. "It could be a watch," Mara added quickly. "Mom wears a watch." Daniel's gaze flicked to Eleanor's wrist instinctively. It was bare now. "Were you wearing it that night?" he asked. Eleanor did not look down. "Yes." The word landed heavy. Daniel's stomach twisted. "And now?" "I took it off days ago," she replied. It felt wrong. Silence pressed in around them. Mara's breathing grew shallow. "Why are you doing this?" she demanded, eyes flashing toward Daniel. "Why are you looking for reasons to blame someone?" "I'm looking for what happened," he said, and heard how thin it sounded. "What happened?" Mara echoed bitterly. "Dad got himself killed." The statement sliced through the room. Eleanor's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Mara," she said, warning in her tone. "It's true," Mara insisted, tears gathering but not falling. He wouldn't stop. He kept talking about exposing people, about justice, about how we had to be brave. Brave for what? So someone could shoot him. Daniel stared at his sister, something shifting beneath her anger. "Did you argue with him that night?" She hesitated. "He came into my room," she admitted. "He asked if I'd told Mom about the contracts." "Did you?" Daniel asked. "Yes," she shot back. "Because I was scared. He was acting crazy." Eleanor inhaled sharply but said nothing. "What did he do?" Daniel pressed. "He yelled," Mara said, her voice breaking. "He said I was undermining him, that I didn't understand what was at stake." "Did he threaten you?" Daniel asked. "No," she whispered. "He just looked at me like I was already lost." Daniel felt something fracture inside him. He imagined his father pacing, convinced that betrayal surrounded him, that even his daughter was aligned against him. "After he left your room," Daniel asked carefully, "did you follow him?" Mara's eyes widened. "No. Think." "I said no," she snapped. Eleanor stepped between them slightly, a subtle but unmistakable gesture. "This is not how we solve anything," she said quietly. Daniel felt anger flare again. "You think silence solves it. I think accusation destroys it," she replied. Mara looked from one to the other, her face pale. "Do you think I killed him?" she asked Daniel, the question small and devastating. Daniel's throat closed. "I don't know what to think." The honesty hurt more than a denial. Mara stepped back as if struck. "You're unbelievable," she whispered. "You come home and turn into a detective. Because someone has to," Daniel shot back. "And if it's Mom," Mara said, her voice shaking now. "What then?" "You hand her to the police. You tear everything apart." Daniel had no answer. Eleanor's voice cut through the tension. "Enough," she said. And there was command in it again. "We are not turning on each other in this house." "In this house," Daniel repeated bitterly. "Where someone walked down that hallway with a gun." Eleanor's composure cracked just slightly. "Do you think I don't replay that moment every night?" she demanded. "Do you think I don't hear the shot when I close my eyes?" Daniel faltered, but only for a second. "Then tell me exactly where you were." "In the kitchen," she said firmly. "Mara was upstairs. You were at the table. Your father was standing." "And the hallway," Daniel pressed. "Was empty," she replied. "But the footage shows a shadow," she interrupted. "A distorted shape in bad lighting." Mara wiped at her eyes angrily. "Dad could have gone into the garage," she said suddenly. Daniel frowned. "Why would he?" "To get something," she replied. "He was pacing. He kept going in and out of rooms." Eleanor's gaze flickered, calculating. "He did go to the garage earlier," she said slowly. Daniel looked between them. "But the timestamp is 3 minutes before the shot." "Maybe he came back in," Mara insisted. "Maybe he had the gun." Daniel's mind raced through the possibility. His father entering the garage, retrieving the gun, walking into the hallway, confronting someone at the dining room entrance. The bullet traveling at an angle that matched self-inflicted accident or misfire. "But the gun was found in the study," Daniel said. "Maybe he dropped it," Mara countered. "Maybe someone moved it." The last possibility hung heavy. If someone moved the gun after the shot, then the scene had been manipulated. Daniel's gaze slid to Eleanor again, and she did not miss it. "You think I staged it," she said quietly. "I think someone did," he replied. Silence pressed in once more. The house felt smaller, as if walls were leaning inward to hear. Eleanor straightened. "We are not going to solve this by tearing each other apart," she said. "If there is evidence, we give it to the police." Daniel hesitated. "And tell them what?" "That we suspect each other." "Yes," she said firmly. If that is what it takes. Her willingness unsettled him. If she were guilty, would she volunteer exposure, or was it confidence that the footage proved nothing definitive? He felt trapped in a loop where every action could be interpreted as innocence or manipulation. Mara suddenly turned and left the room, the door slamming down the hallway. The sound reverberated like a second shot. Daniel closed the laptop slowly. If I take this to the police, he said, everything changes. Everything already changed, Eleanor replied. He searched her face again, desperate for something unambiguous. Did you ever hold the gun that night? She met his gaze steadily. I touched it after he fell, to move it away from him. Why? Daniel asked. Because it was near his hand, she said. And I did not want you to see it there. The admission landed like ice. So you moved it? Yes. To the study? Yes. Daniel felt dizzy. That meant the original placement of the gun might have indicated something entirely different. Why didn't you tell the police? Because in shock, she said sharply. I did not remember every detail. And by the time I did, it was too late. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, mind spiraling. If his father had held the gun and Eleanor had moved it, then the trajectory calculations might have been misinterpreted. The hallway figure could have been him. The metallic glint could have been his watch. Why are you telling me this now? He asked. Because you forced me, she replied. Because secrets rot when left alone. He let out a shaky breath. You should have told me. I was trying to protect you, she said softly. The phrase echoed again, heavy with implication. Protection had become the justification for every omission. Footsteps sounded again down the hallway. Mara returned. Her expression hardened. I checked my jewelry box, she said flatly. The bracelet was there that night. I never wore it to dinner. Daniel looked at her, then at Eleanor. The glint on the footage loomed in his mind. Where is your watch? Daniel asked his mother. In my room, she replied. Get it. She hesitated only a second before leaving. Mara crossed her arms, defensive. Do you believe her? She asked quietly. I don't know, Daniel admitted. Mara's jaw tightened. If you turn her in without proof, you'll destroy us. If I don't, he said. And she did it. Then what are we? Mara had no answer. Eleanor returned with the watch, placing it on the desk. Daniel compared it to the paused image, zooming in again. The band appeared similar in width, the reflective surface consistent, but the resolution was too poor for certainty. It could be either, Daniel muttered. Exactly, Eleanor said. The ambiguity was suffocating. Every path forward required trust he did not possess. If he withheld the footage, he risked covering up a crime. If he shared it, he risked condemning someone he loved. His phone buzzed again, slicing through the tension. A message from an unknown number. Stop digging. Daniel felt his stomach drop. He showed the screen to them without speaking. Mara's eyes widened. Eleanor's face drained of color for the first time. Victor, Mara whispered. Or someone else, Daniel said. Eleanor took the phone, reading the message again. This is not a coincidence, she murmured. Daniel's pulse spiked. They know. Know what? Mara asked. That we're looking, he replied. Eleanor handed the phone back slowly. This is what your father invited into our lives, she said quietly. Threats. Intimidation. Daniel's mind raced. If external forces were watching, then the hallway figure might not be the central truth. Perhaps someone had entered unseen, manipulated footage, staged movement. We need to go to the police, Mara said suddenly, fear overriding anger. And say what? Daniel replied. That we have a blurry shadow and a text. That's enough, she insisted. Eleanor's gaze shifted toward the window as headlights briefly passed outside. If we go, she said slowly, we must go together. Daniel felt the weight of that word. Together. Unity as shield. He looked at the paused frame once more, at the silhouette that could be his mother, his sister, his father, or a stranger. The uncertainty gnawed at him, corrosive and relentless. Tomorrow, he said finally. We go tomorrow. Eleanor nodded, though something in her eyes suggested calculation beyond agreement. Mara exhaled shakily, relief and dread intertwining. Daniel closed the laptop again, but the image burned behind his eyelids. A figure in the hallway, a gunshot splitting the night, a family unraveling in the aftermath. He understood now that even if the police dissected every pixel of that footage, even if they traced every contract and questioned every associate, the damage inside the house had already taken root. Suspicion had seeped into their foundations, turning love into leverage. And as he stood there between his mother and sister, phone still warm in his hand from the threat, he knew that whatever truth emerged next would not restore what they had been. It would only redefine what they were willing to lose to survive it. He understood now that even if the police dissected every pixel of that footage, even if they traced every contract and questioned every associate, the damage inside the house had already taken root. Suspicion had seeped into their foundations, turning love into leverage. The rest of the night passed without sleep. Daniel lay in his childhood bed, phone on his chest, staring into darkness that felt crowded with unseen observers. Every creak of the house sounded intentional. Every passing car outside felt like surveillance. He replayed the text message in his mind, stopped digging, and wondered whether it was meant as intimidation or mercy. Around 3 a.m, he heard movement in the hallway. Not the restless pacing of anxiety, but slow, deliberate steps. He rose quietly and cracked his door open just enough to see the outline of his mother moving toward the study. She did not turn on the lights. She did not hesitate. She slipped inside and closed the door softly behind her. Daniel waited 30 seconds before following. The study door was not fully latched. Through the narrow gap, he saw Eleanor standing in front of the desk, the laptop open again. The glow illuminated her face from below, sharpening lines that had not existed a month ago. She navigated through folders with precision, deleting files one by one. "Mom," Daniel said from the doorway. She did not jump. She closed the laptop slowly and turned toward him. "You should be sleeping." "What are you doing?" he asked. "Cleaning up," she replied. "Deleting evidence," he countered. Her expression hardened. "Deleting copies of financial documents that could put you and your sister in danger." Daniel stepped into the room fully. "Or deleting proof." "Of what?" she demanded. "That Dad wasn't crazy," he said. "That he was right." Eleanor's lips pressed thin. "Being right does not protect you from bullets. Neither does ignorance," Daniel shot back. She walked past him, heading for the door. "If you insist on involving the police tomorrow, you can explain why your father stored illegal records in our home." Daniel froze. "Illegal?" "Yes," she said sharply. "He did not simply observe corruption. He participated long enough to document it." The statement struck like a physical blow. "You're saying he was guilty." "I am saying he was entangled," she replied. Daniel's mind spun. If his father had participated before turning against the scheme, then motive shifted again. Retaliation could be personal, not political. "Why didn't he leave it alone?" Daniel whispered. "Because he believed redemption required exposure," she said quietly. "And he believed he could control the fallout." Daniel thought of the note again. "I know everything." Perhaps it had not been directed solely at his mother. Perhaps it had been written in a state of unraveling awareness, a recognition that he was surrounded by compromises. "Did you know he was involved?" Daniel asked. "Yes," Eleanor said without hesitation. "And you stayed." "I tried to stop him," she replied. "I tried to convince him that confession to authorities was safer than public spectacle. But he wouldn't listen." Daniel finished. "No," she said softly. "He would not." Daniel felt anger and grief twist together. "So you met with Victor to stop him?" "Yes." "And he thought you betrayed him?" "Yes." The simplicity of her answers felt both honest and rehearsed. "Why didn't you tell the police about the documents?" Daniel pressed. "Because possession implicates us," she replied. "And I will not have you and your sister dragged through courtrooms because your father wanted to be a martyr." The word hung heavy. Martyr. It reframed everything. "You think he wanted to die?" Daniel asked. "I think he wanted to win," she said. "And sometimes that is indistinguishable." Silence thickened. Daniel realized that even if she were telling the truth, it did not erase the shadow in the hallway. "Did you delete the garage footage?" he asked suddenly. Her gaze flicked to the laptop. "No." "Swear it." "I do not swear to my children," she said coldly. "I speak plainly." He reopened the laptop and checked. The files were still there. At breakfast, Mara was pale but composed. The threat message had drained some of her earlier defiance, replacing it with wary alertness. "If we go to the police," she said quietly, "we should show them everything. The footage, the text." Eleanor stirred her coffee slowly. "We will," she said. Daniel studied her face, searching for signs of another strategy forming beneath the surface. "We go together," he repeated. "Together," she agreed. But as the morning progressed, something in the air felt off. Eleanor took a call in the kitchen, speaking in hushed tones. Daniel caught fragments. "Not yet. Too risky. I understand," before she ended it abruptly when he entered. "Who was that?" he asked. "Insurance," she replied too quickly. He did not challenge her, but doubt lodged deeper. By noon, Daniel's phone buzzed again. A new message, this time with an attachment. No text, just a video file. His pulse spiked as he opened it. The footage was grainier than their security camera, shot from a distance across the street. It showed the front of their house the night of the shooting. The timestamp matched. At 7:40 p.m., headlights appeared in the frame. A dark SUV pulled into the driveway briefly, then backed out and parked further down the street, partially obscured by trees. Daniel's breath caught. At 7:44, the SUV's driver's side door opened. A figure stepped out, walked toward the house, then disappeared from view near the garage. The gunshot echoed faintly through the video. At 7:45. At 7:47, the same figure returned to the SUV and drove away. Daniel's hands trembled. He showed the video to Mara first. Her eyes widened. "That's not us," she whispered. "No," he said. Eleanor entered the room as they replayed it. Her face drained of color as the SUV appeared. "Where did you get that?" she asked sharply. "It was sent to me," Daniel replied. "By whom?" "No number attached," he said. "Anonymous." Eleanor's composure fractured visibly this time. "They're escalating," she murmured. "Who?" Mara demanded. "The same people your father provoked," Eleanor said. Daniel's mind raced. The hallway figure could have been a distraction. Someone entering from outside could have timed it precisely. The garage door had not been locked. The security camera inside would not capture the driveway. "Why send this to me?" Daniel asked aloud. "To warn you," Mara said. "Or to manipulate you," Eleanor countered. Daniel replayed the video again, focusing on the silhouette. It did not resemble any of them. The build was broader, the stride heavier. "This changes things," he said slowly. "It complicates them," Eleanor replied. "If someone came from outside," Mara said, hope flickering, "then none of us." "Do not jump to relief," Eleanor cut in. "Footage can be staged." Daniel looked at her sharply. "You think this is fake?" "I think," she said carefully, "that someone wants you to believe a specific version." Daniel felt anger rise again. "You always have an alternative explanation. Because reality rarely presents itself cleanly," she shot back. He stared at the two videos in his mind, the internal garage footage and the external street footage. The timeline overlapped too precisely to ignore. The figure from the SUV disappeared near the garage at 7:44. The internal camera showed someone entering the hallway from the garage at 7:42. The mismatch was 2 minutes. "Wait," Daniel murmured. "The timestamps." He reopened the internal footage and checked the system clock. It was 2 minutes fast. His heart pounded harder. If the garage camera was ahead by 2 minutes, then the internal figure entering at 7:42 corresponded to 7:40 real time. That meant the person entering from the SUV at 7:44 real time could align with the internal exit at 7:47 camera time. He recalculated quickly, adrenaline sharpening his focus. The timelines overlapped almost perfectly when adjusted. "That's him," Mara whispered. "Or her," Eleanor corrected automatically. Daniel ignored her. "The camera clock is off," he said. "By 2 minutes." He adjusted the mental timeline again. SUV arrives 7:40 real time. Internal camera reads 7:42. Figure enters hallway. Shot at 7:45 real time. Camera reads 7:47. Figure exits at 7:47 camera time, which is 7:45 real time. His breath caught. The shadow in the hallway could be the person from the SUV, not his mother or sister. Eleanor stared at the screens, processing. For the first time, genuine confusion crossed her face. "That would mean," she began slowly, "that someone entered through the garage while we were at dinner, and left immediately after." Mara finished. Daniel felt a surge of relief so intense it bordered on dizziness. But it was fragile relief. If an outsider had killed his father, then the threat was not internal. It was ongoing. "Why send this to me?" he repeated. "To show you that digging is dangerous," Eleanor said quietly. "To prove capability." Daniel's phone buzzed again. A new message. "Next time there won't be a warning." Mara let out a shaky breath. "We have to go to the police." Eleanor nodded slowly. "Yes," but Daniel hesitated. If he went now, the anonymous sender would know he had taken the bait. The message might have been intended to push them toward exposure, or to test their response. "We can't wait," Mara insisted. "We need to think," Daniel replied. "Think about what?" she demanded. "They killed Dad." Eleanor placed a hand on Mara's shoulder. "Your brother is right. Panic is predictable." Daniel felt torn between urgency and caution. If the sender wanted silence, why send proof? "To control narrative," Eleanor said. Daniel looked at her sharply. "Or because they want us to know it wasn't you." The words hung there. Eleanor's eyes flashed. "Do not weaponize this." "I'm not," he said quickly. "I'm trying to understand." Mara sank into a chair, overwhelmed. "So what do we do?" Daniel stared at the screens again, mind racing. We respond, he said slowly. To who? Mara asked. To the number, he replied. There's no number, Eleanor reminded him. Then we provoke, he said. Eleanor's expression darkened. That is exactly what your father did. And look where caution got him, Daniel shot back. Silence pressed in once more. If they're watching, Daniel continued. We act like we're not afraid. Bravery is not invincibility, Eleanor warned. No, he said. But paralysis is surrender. Mara looked between them, torn. You sound like Dad. The statement struck harder than accusation. Daniel swallowed. Maybe he wasn't entirely wrong. Eleanor's gaze softened for a moment, grief resurfacing beneath layers of control. He was not wrong about injustice, she said quietly. He was wrong about consequence. Daniel felt the weight of that word settle again. Consequence. Every action demanded payment. He picked up his phone and typed a reply to the anonymous thread. We have the footage. We are going to the police. He hesitated only a second before hitting send. Eleanor exhaled sharply. You just escalated. Yes, he said. The reply came faster than he expected. Do that, and your sister's name goes public. Mara froze. What does that mean? Daniel's stomach dropped. They're threatening you. With what? She whispered. Another message arrived. She was closer to him than you think. Daniel's mind raced through possibilities. They're trying to divide us, he said, though uncertainty crept in. Eleanor's face had gone rigid. Delete it, she said. No, Daniel replied. They want you reactive, she insisted. Mara's breathing quickened. What do they know? Daniel stared at the phone. If they had surveillance beyond the house, if they had followed Mara, then this was not random intimidation. Did you ever meet anyone Dad worked with? Daniel asked her suddenly. No, she said quickly. Think. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. Once, she admitted. A man came by when Dad wasn't home. He said he needed to drop off papers. Daniel's pulse spiked. When? 2 weeks before, she said. Did you let him in? She nodded again, guilt flashing across her face. He seemed normal. Did you tell Dad? No, she whispered. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. What did he look like? Mara described him in halting detail. Mid-40s. Broad shoulders. Dark SUV. Daniel and Eleanor exchanged a glance. He saw her, Daniel murmured. He knows her. Another message appeared. Smart boy. Daniel's blood ran cold. They're watching now, Mara whispered. Eleanor moved toward the curtains instinctively. The street outside looked ordinary. Suburban. Safe. Daniel typed again, fingers shaking. What do you want? The reply was immediate. The file. Daniel's chest tightened. The file Victor had mentioned. You told someone about it, Eleanor said sharply. No, he insisted. They knew before, she countered. Mara looked confused. What file? Daniel hesitated. Dad compiled evidence. Contracts. Transfers. And you think they believe we have it, she said. They're certain, Eleanor corrected. Daniel felt the ground shift again. If the killer believed the file existed and was accessible to the family, then the threats were leveraged to retrieve it. I don't know where it is, Daniel said aloud. The phone buzzed once more. You will. A final message followed. Clocks ticking. Daniel stared at the screen, heart pounding. Eleanor's voice was quiet but firm. Now you understand. He looked at her. Understand what? That this was never about guilt or innocence inside this house, she said. It is about control. Mara wrapped her arms around herself, fear replacing anger. They killed him for a file. Or because he refused to hand it over, Daniel said. Eleanor's gaze sharpened. Which means he hid it well. Daniel's mind churned. If his father had anticipated retaliation, he might have left clues. The note. I know everything. Perhaps it was less accusation and more signal. Where would he hide something important? Mara asked quietly. Daniel thought of his father's habits, his routines, his paranoia near the end. He thought of the glow-in-the-dark stars on his bedroom ceiling, of childhood secrets hidden in plain sight. He felt a slow realization dawn. The attic, he said. Eleanor frowned. Why? He told me once that the safest place is where no one bothers to look, Daniel replied. Mara looked uncertain. We've never used the attic. Exactly, Daniel said. Another buzz vibrated in his hand, but this time he did not look immediately. He stared at his mother and sister, aware that whatever they found up there would escalate everything. If the file existed, possession meant leverage and danger. If it did not, the threats would continue without bargaining power. Together, Eleanor said again. Daniel nodded slowly. As they moved toward the hallway, The house felt different again. Not smaller this time, but charged, as if every step activated unseen observers. The attic door creaked when Daniel pulled the cord, the ladder unfolding with a mechanical groan. Dust drifted down in faint spirals. Daniel climbed first, heart hammering, aware that the next few minutes might redefine everything again. Below him, his mother and sister waited in tense silence. He reached the top and shone his phone light across boxes long untouched. Old decorations, suitcases, forgotten remnants of earlier stability, and somewhere among them, perhaps, the file that had cost his father his life. And somewhere among them, perhaps, the file that had cost his father his life. Daniel pulled himself fully into the attic, the wood creaking under his weight. The air was thick with insulation dust and the stale scent of things abandoned. He swept the beam of his phone slowly across the narrow space, heart pounding so hard he could hear it echo in his ears. Below, he could feel rather than see Eleanor and Mara watching him, their silence heavier than any words. "Do you see anything?" Mara called softly. "Just boxes," Daniel replied, though his voice felt distant to his own ears. He crawled forward carefully, avoiding exposed nails and splintered beams. There were old holiday decorations in labeled containers, childhood toys he barely remembered, tax documents from years long settled. He moved one box aside, and then another, methodical but increasingly frantic. If his father had hidden something here, it would not be obvious. His phone buzzed again in his hand. He ignored it. "Daniel," Eleanor said, her tone controlled but urgent. "Check your phone." He exhaled sharply and glanced at the screen. Tick. Just that single word. His pulse spiked. They knew where he was. "They're watching," Mara whispered from below, as if she had read his thoughts. Daniel forced himself to focus. If someone had external surveillance, perhaps even internal, then panic would only validate their leverage. He resumed searching, pushing aside a suitcase he had not opened in a decade. Underneath it was a small metal lockbox he did not recognize. His breath caught. "Mom," he called down quietly. "Did Dad ever have a lockbox up here?" "No," she replied immediately. "Not that I know of." Daniel reached for it. The box was heavier than it looked. A small combination lock secured it, simple but deliberate. "Bring it down," Eleanor said. "No," Daniel replied instinctively. "If this is it, we don't open it where they expect." "Daniel," she warned. Another buzz. "Talk." His throat tightened. They were counting. He climbed down slowly with the box in his hands. Mara stared at it as if it might explode. Eleanor's gaze was unreadable, but her jaw was clenched. "If that's the file," Mara whispered, "we give it to the police and walk into a building they probably have influence in," Eleanor countered sharply. Daniel felt the weight of the box as more than metal. It was leverage. It was proof. It was motive. It was danger. "Dad would have left a clue," he murmured. "For the combination?" Mara asked. Daniel nodded. His mind raced through memories, through numbers his father favored, through dates that mattered, birthdays, anniversaries. But his father had been cautious. He would not use something obvious. "I know everything." The phrase echoed again. "What if it's not a number?" Daniel said slowly. Eleanor frowned. "It's a combination lock. 3 digits, Daniel said, staring at it. But maybe the digits mean something else. His father had loved puzzles, had once told Daniel that the best hiding places were layered with meaning. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, forcing his mind backward. The note, the garage, the timeline. 7:45, Mara said suddenly. The time of the shot. Daniel's heart lurched. He turned the dial carefully. 7, 4, 5. The lock clicked open. Silence swallowed the room. Mara inhaled sharply. Eleanor's composure faltered for a split second. Daniel lifted the lid slowly. Inside were several flash drives, a stack of printed contracts, and a sealed envelope addressed in his father's handwriting. For Daniel. His hands trembled as he picked up the envelope. Another buzz. "Open it." The message made his stomach twist. They knew. "Turn off your phones," Eleanor said sharply. Daniel hesitated only a second before powering his down. Mara followed. Eleanor did the same. The sudden digital silence felt both safer and more isolating. Daniel opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a handwritten letter, pages folded tightly. He unfolded the first sheet and began to read aloud, his voice unsteady but clear. "If you are reading this, then something has gone wrong. I underestimated how far they would go, and I may have miscalculated the risk to you. That is my failure, not yours." Mara covered her mouth, tears gathering. "I kept evidence not to become a hero, but because silence would have made me complicit. If they try to convince you I was reckless, understand that I was already entangled long before I tried to step away." Daniel's throat tightened. I do not know who will stand beside you when the truth surfaces. I do not know who you will be able to trust. That uncertainty is the most dangerous weapon they have. He glanced at Eleanor briefly, then continued. The file contains names, transfers, and recordings. It implicates men who will not hesitate to protect themselves. If I am gone, do not assume the threat is over. It may have only begun. The words seemed to echo in the quiet house. I moved the gun after the first warning. If something happens inside this house, understand that I may have made choices in panic. Do not let those choices destroy you. Daniel froze. He read the sentence again silently. I moved the gun after the first warning. Eleanor's eyes widened. What does that mean? Daniel's pulse pounded. He's saying he relocated the gun before the shooting. Mara shook her head. Why? Because he expected something, Daniel murmured. He read further. If you find this, do not confront them impulsively. Use leverage carefully. Exposure is protection only when timed correctly. Daniel lowered the page slowly. So he knew, Mara whispered. Yes, Daniel said. He knew they were watching. Eleanor stepped closer, her voice tight. Does he say who? Daniel flipped through the pages quickly. There were references to initials, to coded transactions, to a meeting scheduled that he never described fully. No direct name of the shooter. He doesn't, Daniel said. Mara looked at the flash drives. What's on those? Evidence, Eleanor replied quietly. Daniel's mind raced. If the anonymous sender wanted the file, then possession was both shield and target. We can't keep this here, Mara said urgently. No, Eleanor agreed. Daniel looked between them. If we hand it over, we lose leverage. And if we keep it, we become hostages, Mara countered. Eleanor's gaze sharpened. Your father believed exposure would save us. It did not. He didn't expose it, Daniel said. He hesitated. Because he was trying to calculate consequence, she replied. Daniel felt something shift. You knew he had this. Eleanor hesitated. You knew, he pressed. Yes, she said finally. I found drafts of his letter weeks ago. And you didn't tell me. I was trying to destroy it, she said quietly. The admission stunned him. Destroy it? Mara echoed. To prevent exactly this, Eleanor said sharply. To prevent you from becoming bargaining chips. Daniel stared at her. You would have erased proof. I would have erased motive, she replied. Silence thickened again. Daniel looked at the lockbox contents. If we give this to the police now, they'll know we found it. And they will know we withheld it, Eleanor added. Another thought struck Daniel. What if we don't give them the original? Mara frowned. What do you mean? We copy it, he said. We distribute it. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. To who? Journalists. Anonymous uploads. If it's everywhere, they can't suppress it easily. And they retaliate publicly, Eleanor said. Escalate. Daniel felt adrenaline spike again. Dad wrote that exposure is protection when timed correctly. And you think this is correct timing? She asked. No, he admitted. But neither is waiting. Mara's hands trembled. They threatened me. Daniel's chest tightened. I know. Eleanor's gaze softened toward her daughter, protective instinct overriding calculation for a moment. If they have dirt on you, she said quietly, we need to know what. Mara's face paled. I didn't do anything. Not intentionally, Eleanor clarified. Daniel felt dread settle in his stomach. What did the man who came here ask you? Mara swallowed. Just where Dad kept documents. He said he needed to check something. Did you show him anything? Daniel asked. I showed him the study, she whispered. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. That's how they knew. Daniel's mind snapped into clarity. The man had likely planted something. A tracker. A camera. Check the house, he said urgently. They moved quickly now, tension replacing paralysis. Daniel scanned the study first, looking for unfamiliar devices. Behind the bookshelf, near the router, he found a small black square attached magnetically to the metal frame. His pulse roared in his ears. He held it up silently. Mara gasped. Eleanor's face hardened into something almost unrecognizable. They've been inside, Daniel said quietly. More than once, Eleanor replied. He crushed the device in his fist instinctively, but Eleanor grabbed his wrist. No. If it stops transmitting suddenly, they know we found it. Daniel froze. She was right. We need to leave it active, she said. And pretend we don't know, Mara whispered. Daniel felt anger and fear coil together. This is bigger than I thought. It always was, Eleanor said. He looked at the lockbox again. The file was leverage, but also bait. If they exposed it recklessly, they could trigger immediate retaliation. If they withheld it, they remained under threat. His phone was still off in his pocket. He resisted the urge to power it on. What would Dad do? Mara asked quietly. Daniel thought of the letter, of his father's calculated warnings, of the acknowledgement that he had misjudged timing. He would push, Daniel said slowly. And look what that cost him, Eleanor replied. The statement hung in the air like a verdict. Daniel felt something shift inside him. A realization not of clarity, but of responsibility. If he acted impulsively, he risked repeating his father's mistake. If he hesitated too long, he risked allowing the narrative to be shaped entirely by their enemies. He looked at his mother, then at his sister. No more secrets, he said firmly. Eleanor held his gaze. Everything, he insisted. From now on. She hesitated only a second before nodding. Everything. Mara nodded too, though fear lingered in her eyes. Daniel exhaled slowly, steadying himself. They had the file. They had proof of surveillance. They had external evidence of a vehicle. The internal suspicion that had nearly destroyed them an hour earlier now felt like part of a larger manipulation. But trust, once fractured, did not repair instantly. Daniel glanced toward the hallway, imagining again the shadowed figure captured by the camera. Now he saw it differently, not as a silhouette of his mother or sister, but as an intruder who had walked confidently through their private space. The violation burned deeper than suspicion. They think they can control us, he said quietly. Eleanor's eyes hardened. Then we control timing. Mara looked between them. How? Daniel stared at the flash drives again, mind racing through possibilities. We don't go to the police yet, he said finally. Mara's head snapped up. What? We make copies, he clarified. And we send a message. Eleanor's gaze sharpened. To who? To them, Daniel replied. We show them we're not powerless. The idea hung heavy. And if they escalate? Mara whispered. They already have, he said. Eleanor studied him, searching for recklessness in his expression. This is not a game. I know, he said quietly. It's survival. Silence settled again, but it felt different now. Not paralyzing, charged. Daniel picked up the lockbox lid and closed it gently. For a brief moment, he imagined an alternative life. One where dinner had ended without a gunshot, where suspicion had not turned inward, where his father's ambition had not collided with invisible forces. But that life no longer existed. What existed now was leverage, threat, and consequence. And as he stood there with the file that had cost his father everything, he understood that the next move would not simply determine justice. It would determine who among them would carry the next burden when the retaliation came. And as he stood there with the file that had cost his father everything, he understood that the next move would not simply determine justice. It would determine who among them would carry the next burden when the retaliation came. They did not speak for a long moment. The house felt suspended between past and consequence, every object now charged with context. Daniel carried the lockbox back into the study and set it on the desk where the gun had once rested. The symbolism did not escape him. Evidence had replaced weapon. Truth had replaced denial. But both could still destroy. We copy everything tonight, Daniel said quietly. Offline, no network. Eleanor nodded once. We use your father's old external drive. It's not connected. Mara hovered near the doorway, fear and determination battling across her face. And then what? She asked. Then we send a message, Daniel replied. Not to them directly, to someone who can't ignore it. Eleanor's eyes narrowed slightly. Journalists. Yes, Daniel said. Multiple. Anonymous submissions. If the evidence spreads, they can't suppress all of it. And if they trace it back to us? Mara whispered. They already have, Daniel answered. They're threatening you. The room fell silent again, but it was no longer the silence of suspicion. It was calculation. Shared. They worked carefully. Daniel plugged the flash drives into the offline laptop, scanning through folders of transactions, recordings of phone calls, spreadsheets annotated in his father's handwriting. The scale of the corruption became clearer with every document. Contracts rerouted through shell companies. Payments disguised as consulting fees. Names of city officials Daniel recognized from local news. His father had not exaggerated. He had been deep inside it. Eleanor stood behind him as he scrolled, her face rigid. He should have walked away sooner, she murmured. He tried, Daniel said quietly. Too late. Mara leaned closer, reading snippets of transcripts aloud under her breath. They talk like it's normal, she said, disbelief shaking her voice. Like it's just business. It was, Eleanor replied bitterly. Until it wasn't. They copied everything twice, onto separate drives. Daniel labeled one simply with a date. The other he slid into his backpack without comment. You're keeping one, Eleanor observed. Yes, he said. She did not argue. When the copying finished, Daniel powered down the laptop and sat back in the chair, exhaustion crashing over him. We send it at dawn, he said. From somewhere public. Not from here, Mara added quickly. Never from here. Eleanor agreed. They left the tracking device in place, untouched, still transmitting the illusion of ignorance. They left their phones powered off. They left the lockbox empty but visible, its presence now irrelevant. Before going to bed, Daniel unfolded his father's letter again and read the final lines silently. There was no instruction for revenge, no demand for martyrdom, only a plea for timing and caution. It struck him that his father had not been reckless at the end. He had been cornered. At 5 in the morning, they drove separately to avoid pattern. Daniel took his car and headed toward the university campus. Eleanor drove in the opposite direction toward a commuter station with public Wi-Fi. Mara stayed behind, as planned, to preserve normalcy and maintain the illusion that nothing had changed. Daniel parked in a nearly empty lot near a cafe that opened early for students. Inside, the barista barely glanced at him. He ordered coffee he did not want and sat near the back wall. His hands were steady now, not from calm but from inevitability. He inserted the drive into a public computer and began uploading the encrypted files to multiple investigative journalists and 2 national outlets known for publishing corruption exposés. He wrote no explanation beyond a brief line. If anything happens to this family, release everything immediately. He hesitated only once before pressing send. Across town, Eleanor did the same. They had not coordinated every detail verbally, but instinct had aligned them. Daniel closed the browser, wiped the session history, and walked out into the cool morning air. His phone vibrated as he powered it back on. Several missed messages. One new message from the anonymous thread. You chose poorly. Daniel stared at it, then typed a final reply. We chose visibility. He did not wait for a response. By mid-morning, the first journalist replied, requesting verification. Daniel ignored the request. If they were serious, they would verify independently. The second journalist's automated acknowledgement was less reassuring but sufficient. At noon, the anonymous thread sent a photo. Daniel's heart dropped when he opened it. It was a picture of Mara walking into school weeks earlier, taken from across the street. Rage surged through him. Another message followed. You think exposure protects you. It exposes everyone. Daniel's chest tightened, but beneath the fear was something else. Certainty. They had reacted. He did not reply. At home, Eleanor received the same image. Mara received none, and they did not tell her. Not yet. By afternoon, a local news website published a small piece referencing anonymous documents alleging widespread municipal corruption. It was cautious, but it existed. Names were not yet listed, but the implication was clear. Daniel's phone buzzed again. You've made this worse. He felt strangely calm now. Good, he whispered to himself. That evening, a black SUV drove slowly past their house. Mara saw it from the window and froze. Eleanor stood beside her, posture straight. Do not react, she said quietly. Daniel stepped into view deliberately, visible through the open blinds. He held the phone loosely at his side, camera app open but not raised. The SUV did not stop this time. It rolled past and disappeared. No message followed. The next morning, national media picked up the story. Names surfaced. Contracts were scrutinized. Officials denied involvement. Investigations were announced publicly. The scale made suppression more complicated. Daniel felt the shift almost physically. The threat did not vanish, but it became riskier for their enemies to act overtly. By noon, the anonymous thread sent one final message. This isn't over. Daniel stared at it for a long time. He typed slowly. It never was. There was no response. Days passed without direct contact. The tracking device remained active, but its transmissions became irrelevant in the flood of public scrutiny. Reporters began calling the house. Eleanor refused interviews. Daniel ignored requests. Mara stayed home from school temporarily, citing grief. Inside the house, the tension shifted from immediate threat to long-term consequence. They spoke more openly now, though the shadow of suspicion lingered like a bruise. One evening, Mara stood in the hallway where the bullet had traveled and traced the line with her finger. If he hadn't moved the gun, she said quietly, would we have blamed each other longer? Daniel considered the question carefully. Probably. Eleanor stood behind them, listening. He tried to protect you even in panic, she said softly. And you tried to protect us by hiding things, Daniel replied. Not accusatory, but factual. She nodded. And nearly destroyed trust in the process. Silence settled, but it was no longer suffocating. Weeks later, arrests were announced. Not for murder, not yet, but for financial crimes connected to the documents. Victor Hale's name surfaced among those under investigation. Daniel felt a strange mixture of vindication and betrayal. Victor had warned him, but he had also been part of it. The SUV did not return. The anonymous thread went silent. One night, Daniel stood alone in the study, looking at the faint stain in the dining room beyond. The house felt different again, scarred, but not collapsing. He unfolded his father's letter one last time and read the opening line again. If you are reading this, then something has gone wrong. He understood now that wrong did not end at death. It expanded outward into choices made by those left behind. Eleanor entered quietly. Do you regret it? She asked. Daniel considered the question fully before answering. No, he said, but I know it's not over. She nodded slowly. It may never be. He met her eyes. Then we live with that. Not acceptance, not peace, but endurance. Mara joined them a moment later, leaning against the doorway. Are we safe? She asked. Daniel hesitated, then chose honesty over comfort. Safer. Eleanor placed a hand on each of their shoulders. Your father believed truth required risk, she said. We have learned that truth also requires strategy. Daniel looked at the hallway one last time. The shadow captured by the camera no longer haunted him as betrayal. It existed now as evidence of intrusion, a violation from outside, rather than fracture within. Trust had not returned to what it once was. It had evolved into something more deliberate, less naive. Outside, the neighborhood remained deceptively calm. Children rode bicycles, lawns were trimmed, life continued. Inside, the consequences remained active, woven into daily decisions. Phones were checked cautiously, doors were locked meticulously, conversations were measured, but they did not fracture again. The gunshot that had split their lives in two had not been the end of the story. It had been the moment illusion collapsed. Daniel folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the lockbox. Not as evidence now, but as reminder. The file had been released, the leverage dispersed, the retaliation contained, at least publicly. He did not delude himself into believing justice had fully arrived. He knew power adapted. He knew enemies recalculated. But he also knew that silence was no longer their weakness. As he turned off the study light and stepped into the hallway, he paused at the threshold where the bullet had traveled. He could almost hear the echo of that night, but it no longer paralyzed him. It propelled him. Behind him, his mother and sister waited. Ahead, uncertainty remained. And somewhere beyond the quiet street, consequences were still unfolding. But this time, they were not alone in carrying them.